listening to Poetics, where poetry meets the voice. I am Tamara Rockwood. I'm coming to you from Bainbridge Island. This is episode 39, and today we're asking, what happens when you pair poetry with cheese? Stay with me. There's something about the way we savor a perfectly aged cheddar or a soft brie that mirrors how we should be reading poems, slowly, attentively, letting the flavors unfold. Both demand that we stop rushing and actually taste. When we're not recording, Ben and I run Bainbridge Island Press, and we publish good poetry. And yes, we have been known to discuss manuscripts over a cheese board. Today, that's called Wine's Day, by the way. Today we are making that combination official. So whether you're a longtime poetry reader or you just came for the cheese, this conversation's for you. So grab your coffee, maybe a nice Chardonnay, and welcome to Poetics. Okay, so the poems that we're going to be going over today, there's three of them. The first we're going to discuss is A Parable by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And then the second will be by G.K. Chesterton. It will be A Sonnet to a Stilton Cheese. And then finally we are going to end with one of my favorite poets, Donald Hall, O Cheese. So we are going to start with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, the reason why I wanted to pair poetry with cheese is because there is something that is so similar to reading a poem, and it doesn't invade you. That's not the word I'm looking for. You bring it inside you, and you digest it. I think that the metaphor is easy enough. I'm not going to over chew it. But I think that the idea of enjoying food is very, very similar to enjoying poetry. You could read poetry and move on with your life, and that's fine. There's also pizza. You can enjoy pizza and go, it's not life-changing, but some pizza is life-changing. I understand that. I'm not saying it's not. But it's just sometimes when you savor the poetry a little bit longer, a little bit, you discuss it with people like, oh, I think that they did this with the poetry. And someone else says, oh, well, you know what? I tasted fennel, and oh, I didn't even see that. So there's a lot you can do with poetry. So, and there is a poem about every subject. I've looked. So finding poems about cheese actually was not that hard. So anyways, for the joy of the season, we're doing A Parable by Doyle, and here's the full text. The cheese mites asked how the cheese got there, and warmly debated the matter. The orthodox said that it came from the air, and the heretics said from the platter. They argued it long, and they argued it strong, and I hear they are arguing now. But of all the choice spirits who lived in the cheese, not one of them thought of a cow. No. And I would imagine that you can make a Sherlock Holmes mystery out of that. Where did the cheese come from? So what I like about this is it's the cheese mites living inside of a cheese wheel, of a cheese debate, of its origins. And some say it came from the air in divine creation. Others say from the platter, the material world. And then they argue endlessly, but none of them think to look beyond their immediate world to consider the cow. And I think that that is a very pleasant poem about the parable, about human limitations. We argue about origins, we argue about meaning, we argue about existence, and I think that that makes the world more interesting is where do we come from? There are lots of questions. Like, how does life exist? There was a joke that I heard a long, long time ago, and it was this group of scientists, and they were the smartest scientists in the world and in history, and they figured out how to create life. And that's hard, because life is a little bit nebulous. I mean, I'm a poet. Maybe it's figured out and I just haven't read the article yet. But anyways, so how does life really come to be? And they figured it out. So they brought their research in front of God, and they were so excited. They're like, you are going to be so amazed. We have figured out how to create life. And God said, that is amazing. I was the only one that was able to do that. And you did it? And they said, yes. Yes, we did. He's like, I am so excited. Show me. I would love to see. And they said, okay. And so they went over and they got handfuls of dirt and they brought it over and put it in front of God. And God said, oh, no. You need to get your own dirt. I always thought that was funny. I don't know if you're going to find it funny. But anyways, the idea of where do we come from? There are volumes, and it's never ending, because the way that we evolve as people and as cultures and in our communities and in our families, we're always going to see the world in a different way every morning. So anyways, I thought that this was nice to see that we were all cheese mites. Now, what's your cow is the obvious answer we might be missing. I don't know. Is Doyle being cynical or hopeful here? I am hoping he's not being cynical. I don't think so. I think that it's just a discussion of the idea. I think that this is humor that makes philosophical ideas a little bit more accessible. And I think that it is a charming poem that you could share with anyone. And sometimes poetry needs to be that way. You can share it with anyone. Okay. The second one is by J.K. Chesterton. Sonnet to a Stilton Cheese. Stilton, thou shouldst be living at this hour, and so thou art, nor losest grace thereby. England has need of thee, and so have I. She is a fen, far as the eye can scour, league after grassy league, from Lincoln Tower to Stilton in the fields. She is a fen. Yet this high cheese, by choice of fenland men, like a green volcano rose in power. Plain living and long drinking are no more, and pure religion reading household words, and sturdy manhood sitting still all day shrink like this cheese that crumbles to its core, while my digestion, like the House of Lords, the heaviest burdens on herself doth lay. Okay, so Chesterton famously said that poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese, and I cannot emphasize this enough. I think that there should be more poetry about cheese. And then he wrote, in parody of Wordsworth, London, 1802, that says, Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. Chesterton was saying, if Wordsworth can summon Milton to save England, I can summon Stilton cheese. And I think that I would have been very good friends with Chesterton. So anyone that knows Chesterton already, you're ahead of the game. And for anyone who has not been familiarized with his work, he was wonderful. He was a prolific English writer. And he wrote the Father Brown Mysteries. So The Man Who Was Thursday and hundreds of essays. He was known for his wit, his paradoxes. He was known for his physical size. He was over 6 feet tall and nearly 300 pounds. I think that's impressive. He once said that angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And this poem, I think, is very Chesterton. It's serious ideas delivered through absurdity. And I think sometimes we imagine poets who have come before us as being very serious, especially in England, especially in the early 1800s. And I think that it's important to remember that even though poets can take some things a little bit too seriously, like ravens, I'm looking at my stuffed raven from the Tower of London that I got, and it's on my desk. Its name is Charles, because Charles II introduced the ravens to the Tower of London, as we all know. Anyways, I take that very seriously, but we also are a little bit silly. And I think that that also is important to note. So, what is this poem about? What is it about? This poem is treating Stilton cheese as a national hero. It is a monument risen from the flat fenlands of England. Fens, for Americans, are marshy, low-lying region. There's fens, and there's marsh, and then there's a wetland. There's different ways of identifying, like if you're walking through a park and the ground is wet, if the water is coming from somewhere else, then it is a wetland. If the ground is wet, because I'm positive you need to know this. Anyways, if the grounds are wet because of the water coming up from underneath, then it's a fen and it's a still water. And if it's the water coming down from rain and precipitation, I think that's called the ocean. I don't know. You can look it up. You can Google it. I think that's actually called a pond. And maybe it's wet. Anyways, I know what a fen is. So what he's saying is that fens are marshy, low-lying regions, and he emphasizes how flat and humble the landscape is, where he says, league after grassy league, which is such a beautiful line. Yet, from this flatness, Stilton rose like a tall green volcano, and it's an argument for greatness emerging from ordinary places, which I also love. Now, the Wordsworth connection. So William Wordsworth's original poem mourns England's moral decline and wishes that Milton were still alive to inspire the nation. Chesterton swaps Milton for Stilton, and the joke works because he's half serious. The things Chesterton lists as declining are plain living, long drinking, and sturdy manhood standing still all day, are both virtues and vices. And he's mocking the nostalgia while he's indulging it. And I think that that's fun. Okay, the volcano image. Like a tall green volcano rose in power. Now, that's a striking line because you usually don't have green volcanoes. You also don't really have many volcanoes in England. I understand that there are some. Edinburgh is on top of a volcano. But I'm just saying that I think that the volcano's dead. So it's not like Hawaii volcanoes. Okay, so the connection is, for anyone who has not had Stilton cheese, is it has a greenish blue mold running through it. So that it's ekphrastic. Calling it a volcano suggests this dormant power and something that could erupt. So it's just saying that it transforms cheese from humble dairy product to a geological force. And I think that is Chesterton's gift. I think that he's making you see the epic in the everyday. Now, the final couplet in this undercuts everything, because then he says, while my digestion, like the House of Lords, the heaviest burdens on herself doth lay. So he's comparing his struggling stomach to England's legislative body, obviously. Why wouldn't you? as you do, both taking on more than they should. And it's self-deprecating, and it's politically wry, and it's perfectly timed. I think it was great. The poem is building into this patriotic fervor, and then it deflates into a bellyache. So, is he celebrating, or is he mourning? Or is it both? I think that Chesterton genuinely loved the English tradition, and he knew that nostalgia could be silly, and I think that the poem lets him have it both ways. And I think that he has a sincere affection wrapped in irony, and that's what good parody does. It honors the original while creating something new. So the cheese pairing, obviously, Stilton. Go to the store, get the real thing. Find blue-veined crumbly from the English Midlands. Serve it at room temperature, not cold. And it pairs very nicely with ale. So if you want to go full Chesterton, if you wanted to go full Chesterton, you would pair it with a heavy meal and regret everything. Or nothing. I don't know. So, that was love. All right, the final one. So this is Donald Hall. And I have plenty to say about Donald Hall. This is called Oh Cheese. In the pantry, the dear dense cheeses, cheddars and harsh Lancasters, Gorgonzola with its magnanimous manner, the clipped speech of Roquefort, and a head of Stilton that speaks in a sensuous, riddling tongue like Druids. Oh, cheeses of gravity, cheeses of wistfulness, cheeses that weep continually because they know they will die. Oh, cheeses of victory, cheeses wise in defeat, cheeses fat as a cushion lolling in bed until noon. Leiterkrantz, ebullient, jumping like a small dog, noisy. Pont Levique, intellectual and quite well informed. Emmentaler, decent and loyal, a little deaf in the right ear. And Brie, the revealing experience, instantaneous and profound. Oh, cheeses that dance in the moonlight, cheeses that mingle with sausages, cheeses of Stonehenge. Oh, cheeses that are shy, that linger in the doorway, eyes looking down, cheeses spectacular as fireworks. Reblochon, openly sexual, carefully like pine trees, small at the timberline, Port du Salut in love, Caprice, de Dieux, eloquent, tactful, like a 1,000-year-old hostess, and Doyle, always generous to a fault. Oh, village of cheeses, I make you this poem of cheeses. Oh, family of cheeses, living together in pantries. Oh, cheeses that keep to your own nature like a lucky couple, this solitude, this energy, these bodies slowly dying. If there are any cheesophiles that are listening and I mispronounced half of those cheeses, you can absolutely let me know in the comments, because I tried to learn French during the pandemic, and I took 3 years of German, and it's just not going to happen. So I did the best I could. Okay, so who is Donald Hall? Donald Hall was a wonderful man, and he was a former U.S. Poet Laureate, and he won many other awards. There was the National Medal of Arts, the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, but I think that the greatest thing in his life was really that he was married to the poet Jane Kenyon. She tragically died in 1995. And then he wrote about the unbelievable grief of loss. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about cheese. And his ode to cheese, I think, is genuinely and unexpectedly beautiful. Notice the repeated O throughout the poem. This is called an anaphora. It's a repetition at the beginning of lines or of stanzas. It's a classical technique. It echoes ancient odes and hymns, and you can see this in Shakespeare. You can see it in Whitman or Milton, and it's kind of everywhere. I remember doing an essay on the word "o" from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem when I was in college. But if you look at "O Captain, My Captain," by using O, Hall is elevating this cheese to the level of things traditionally praised in poetry. Gods, heroes, the dead. The form itself is the argument. Cheese deserves this reverence. Now, in his poem, Hall personifies an entire pantry of cheeses. Each variety gets a personality. Gorgonzola is magnanimous. Roquefort has clipped speech. Leiterkrantz jumps like a small dog. Pont is intellectual and quite well informed. And Brie is the revealing experience, instantaneous and profound. I love the personification of these cheeses. I think that it is so, I think when they say this is play, this is play. When we say this is the joy in poetry, this is the joy in poetry. This is a celebration of sensory pleasure. It's a celebration of the way that we project personality into the things we love. I think that you could go to any dog park and say the same thing. It's like, that dog is something, I don't know. That metaphor just died, but like a rotten cheese. Also, this poem is a great exercise for listeners. Why does Gorgonzola seem magnanimous when you say those words out loud? Maybe it's because it's strong but not aggressive. It shares space with other flavors. Why is Roquefort's speech clipped? Perhaps because it's sharp. I haven't had Roquefort in, I don't even remember. But I could. And I think what I remember is that there is a salty bite to it. And that seems like a very no-nonsense cheese. And I think that Hall is not being random about these cheeses. I don't think that he is just, going through the motions with these cheeses. I think that there is intention in these personalities of the cheeses. I think this poem invites us to taste with our imagination. Also with this, there's this range of emotion. Look at the emotional vocabulary. There's gravity, wistfulness, victory, defeat, shy, spectacular. One of the cheeses is openly sexual. One of the cheeses is generous to a fault. I think that Hall is giving these cheeses the full range of the human experience. And while some of them will weep continually because they know that they will die, there's also another one that is as fat as a cushion, lolling in bed until noon. And it's funny, but it's also tender. So with the ending, the poem ends with mortality. Oh, cheeses that keep to your own nature like a lucky couple. This solitude, this energy, these bodies slowly dying. What he's doing is cheese is alive in his poetry. It ages. it ripens, it transforms, and it eventually decays. And Hall finds in these cheese this meditation on time and this bittersweet nature of all good things. This lucky couple suggests contentment. There's acceptance. There's partnership in the face of death. And these cheeses are unexpectedly moving, I think. Hall spent his later years writing about aging, and he wrote about loss and the slow approach of death, especially after Jane died. And this poem, for all of its playfulness, carries that awareness. The cheeses are in community. They're a village. They're a family living together in pantries. They keep to their own nature. They have their own energy. And they're all slowly dying. So are we all. Hall makes cheese this mirror for human life, and somehow that's comforting because these cheeses are enjoyed while they're here. I think that this poem demands a cheese board. I can't even imagine myself trying to find these because I'm going to be in the store asking for these cheeses and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I'll have to write it down. They're like, oh, it's pronounced blah, 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 blah. So you might have a better whack at it than me. But get a cheese board. Read this Donald Hall poem. Try to include at least 3 cheeses mentioned in the poem. Try Brie for the revealing experience. Try Gorgonzola for its magnanimity. Try Stilton for Chesterton. And even in this one, it says that in sensuous riddling tongue like druids. Let your taste evolve while you read, and then ask, does the personification fit? Okay, so we were pairing poetry with cheeses today. So we started with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, short, funny, accessible. We moved on to G.K. Chesterton, a little bit more literary, but more humor, good parody. And then with Hall, the longest and the most lyrical, and it builds on that gorgeous, melancholic ending about mortality. So if you were going to have a cheese board, I would get aged cheddar for Doyle, Stilton for Chesterton, definitely Brie Gorgonzola, and Amantillier for Hall. And it also pairs well with a Syrah. That's my advice. Okay, poetry friends, that is all for today. If you have enjoyed chewing onto the world of cheese with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep eating cheese, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for listening to POETICS Podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.